In this video we're going to be modeling this sword. So let's go ahead and drag that into our 3D viewport. Let's drop that 1 meter box just so we have scale. And we'll scale this down. This sword will probably end up being about 1 meter long, maybe half a meter, somewhere in there. So the other thing, this sword is kind of at an angle, and it's also kind of tilted back. So the sword would be longer than this. So I'm not actually going to use this to directly model from, kind of like we did the bottle. But I am just going to have it in the 3D viewport to look at. Normally if I was doing this, I would have this guy on a second monitor, probably just maximized so I could see it, maybe some other sword references. But realistically, I want to try to model this one. So a few things just to talk about before we do this. The only thing in here that we're not going to model is going to be this little ornamentation. We're just going to texture that in. So we will do the cracks in the wood. We'll do these little gems. This little guy, and this is just a sphere. It should be really easy. And then the sword, I'll show you how to do the cracks, but I probably won't go through and do all of them. So let's actually start at the bottom of the sword and just throw this little sphere in. The other thing is I don't want to use a default sphere, again, that 24 by 12. That's going to be a little bit much. Turn that wireframe on. Just because, again, we don't want to have a really high amount of polygons. Because, again, if you've been doing unwrapping, you'll realize the more polygons you have, the harder it is to unwrap and the more edges you have to select. And it's just a little bit more difficult. So let's reduce this to maybe 10 by 6, something like that for the sphere. And that can be fairly small. And again, if you want, just for a frame of reference, you could maybe even just throw in a 1 meter box and just leave it over here, just so you can kind of get a sense of scale. Because the last thing you want to do is really be kind of confused on where you're at scale-wise or where you're at rotation-wise. I don't want to be upside down building this sword in a weird way if I think that I'm right side up. So again, just rely on this guy. If I turn upside down, we'll see Y is pointing down, so we'll just want to flip that back over. So let's do a cylinder for the handle, and 16 sides is probably a little high. Let's see, 8, we'll do 10. Again, sticking with even numbers. Excuse me. So just to make this interesting, if we look at this, it's a little bit wider up here and a little bit thinner up here. So again, we'll go ahead and kind of mimic that. To actually make this a little bit larger. And again, it's perfectly fine to go in and adjust your shape sizes later. A lot of times we'll even just do like a size pass on everything. Let's do something like that. And I'll probably end up beveling this edge, but I'm not going to do it now. I'm going to wait until kind of the main body of the sword is done. We're just going to probably have primitive shapes for everything except for this ornamentation right here. And just get a feel for the size of everything, and then go in and adjust. Other thing that we're noticing is that smoothing, that default smoothing is kind of messing with us. So as we put in shapes, we'll just give them this default material, smoothing angle, set that to 80, and call it good. And the reason I'm setting it to 80, that's just kind of a go-to. So a lot of these things are 90-degree angles or almost a 90-degree angle. So again, setting it to around 80, give or take a little bit depending on your mesh, is just going to make your mesh a little bit easier to work with. So again, we can think of this as just like a little one-handed, I guess you could say, sword. It's more like a dagger with a really wide blade. Because again, it's just kind of a cartoony sword. We want to keep that cartoony feel. That's why we're going to kind of, we're going to kind of like bevel things and make sure things are like a little tilted and skewed, just to make things feel a little bit more cartoony. So when I'm scaling this back and forth, I want to make sure that I don't scale it too much to where there's a little kind of hole in the mesh right here. And the other thing is I don't want to make it so wide that it's unbelievable. I'm going to throw it about right there. Oops, I want to actually throw the entire width right there. So the other thing is looking at this. This polygon right here is just, it's kind of just mashed into this mesh. That's perfectly acceptable. It's done in games, movies. I don't have to model this handle into the guard of this sword. So this polygon right here is never going to be seen. So we really haven't talked that much about polygon count. But this is just one of those things that deleting this polygon out is going to take us from, right here is our triangle count. It says GL. And that GL is just kind of short for OpenGL. But regardless, that's how many triangles are in the scene at one time. So if we select this, excuse me, we're at 160. Delete that. Now we're at 152. So that was effectively 8 triangles. Let's just take a look at that. If I triangulate this, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So all those aren't really bogging down our system anymore. Not the 8 triangles is that big of a deal. But when you're trying to keep stuff low poly, every little triangle helps. So I'm actually going to make this guard a little bit taller. Just overall, just a little bit bigger. And again, we're just eyeballing this. I could definitely put it right up to the shape and get a better sense of things. But again, we don't need this to really be exact. The thing that I'd like to avoid is having people make swords that are super long like this. Ideally, you want to keep with this concept art, because again, it's a little bit silly with how simple you could think of these models as, but for your first handful of models, keeping it simple is actually good. And the other thing is just being able to say, I think that this blade right here is roughly 18 inches long, and then eyeballing that and making it roughly 18 inches long, as opposed to like the bottle we just modeled exactly where everything was. Being able to eyeball things and having an eye for that is a really accurate or a very valuable skill to develop. So now we'll go into modeling the blade, and with this I could drop in another another cube, but I'm just going to copy paste this, move it up, and use this to work from. The only time that I really don't do this is if, let's say, this thing was kind of skewed or something like that, and I needed a more of like a true box. I really wouldn't want to work with something that's really diagonal, but this, I can just scale this into the shape that we need for this blade really, really easily. So the other thing, when you're hitting and when you're scaling at this angle, I want to make sure that I'm actually grabbing this red handle and making it wider. If I accidentally grab this green one, it's going to make it wider and thicker at the same time. We really don't want that. So somewhere in there, so let's take this bottom polygon and we'll throw it down here. And again, same thing with this. This isn't going to be seen. It's hiding within that mesh. So we'll get it about where we want it. About right there should work. And then we'll just delete that out of there. So now if I hide this, it's H to hide, we have an empty hole here, an empty hole here. So one, we're not going to see that in our polygon count, again down here, but we're also not going to see a little circle here and a little square here when we go to unwrap this and texture it. So this is effectively saved texture space that we can use to make our other things a little bit better. So again, we can see the sword kind of tapers out. It's a little bit wider at the top, and that might just be the illusion with this being at an angle, but I actually like the idea of it being a little bit wider at the top. So we're just going to go with that. Make it a little bit wider, something like that. And now what we're going to do is I can kind of do the tip of this sword two ways. I could extrude this, pull it up, and then either do a join average on these two, or if I didn't want it to be all the way pointy, I could just scale these two in, something like this. Or let's undo that real quick. Go all the way back. Make sure that we didn't extrude that. So it says two vertices. We don't have that extra extrusion. So the other thing that I could do is do a loop slice, keep that at 50%, and then just grab this edge and bring it right up. So I'm going to actually do it this way because I'm going to want to have just a little bit of a angle for this blade. So let's make this sword just a little bit longer, kind of feeling out these proportions. Then the other thing we can do is you can see that it has kind of the same thickness almost. I'm going to actually make it just a little bit thinner at the top. So if we look at this from the side, go ahead and get rid of this box. Looking at it from the side, it kind of is pointier at the top. So I scaled in these two vertices. Now I'm going to grab just these two, and I'm just going to scale them in just a tiny bit. So now we have just a good, really subtle slope going. So from here, let's go ahead and look at this. So scale-wise, we're doing okay. We could make things a little bit wider, bigger. Other thing we could do is this. Oh, let's undo that. This handle and this little pommel. I'm just scaling this on the z-axis, so the blue bar. So let's over-exaggerate. I'm going to do it something like this because normally the shape of your hand isn't perfectly round. So we're just going to make that just a little bit oval shape just to make it more visually interesting. So let's go ahead and we'll bevel this. And again, just a really subtle bevel. That should work. I'm not going to bevel this wood. We'll keep this nice and square. So what we need now is I want to do this little inset for the blade. And before we do that, let's actually just want to scale these two edges in. Let's scale just these, oops, hit the wrong hotkey. Scale these two bottom vertices out. And what that's doing, if I look at it from right here, it's giving me this nice angle right here. So it gets it a little bit closer to our concept. Something like that. So now again, we want to have these insets. So to do this, I'm just going to, let's just do one side at a time, and then we'll do both. I'm going to do a mesh edit extrude, right click, and then I'm going to scale this in. And again, it's scaling more quickly up and down than it is left and right. So I'll scale it in a little bit on both axes and then a little bit on just the X. Something like that. So then from here, this is going to be the geometry that I'm going to work with. So the other thing that I want to do is I want to do this at both sides at once. So I could technically turn on my symmetry, hold Alt, and then do symmetry in the Z-axis. So if I was to select, oops, this must not be, oops. So it looks like I broke symmetry, so that's completely fine. Let's turn symmetry in the Z off. I'm not going to worry about that. The way that I originally planned on doing it anyway is I'm going to grab these two polygons, So again, the outside edge ones aren't selected. Do an extrude, so left click to select the tool, right click to activate the tool. Now we're going to hit the R key to switch to scale. Scale this in, and then scale it on just the x-axis, something like that. So again, we get both sides of the model where we want it at the same time. Just turn that wireframe off so you guys don't need to see it. And then from here, what I can do is grab both of these, do an extrude, so left click, right click, hit R to switch to scale, and then I can just scale these in. And I want to be careful. I can see right here how close these two are getting. I don't want them to get too close, And then this should be good. So again, I still have the front two and the back two selected. I'm going to switch to the front view. And right now, if I deselect this, you really can't see what's going on here. I mean, I can see there's a polygon here and a polygon here. But what I'm actually going to do is select these two, select these two, go back to that front view, and switch to my scale tool again, and scale in on the Y and the X axis just a little bit, and then grab just the X axis and scale it in. And what this is accomplishing is now we can kind of see, let's get it from an angle here, that this is just kind of a subtle angle instead of it just being this edge going straight back. So again, this is something you can kind of go to this view and mess with this. And get this where you want it. I don't want it to be too extreme. I did a little more than I initially wanted at first. There we go. Now the other thing that I can do is I could maybe knock my smoothing angle down a little bit. So we just put it to 60, and now I can see how that is affected. So again, it's still round down here. Let's look at our sphere. Our sphere is still round, so that 60-degree mark should be fine with this. And again, you might need to fine-tune that a little bit more. So the other thing that we're noticing is when we extruded that face, it created this little thing right here. So I'm not really a big fan of this. It's not in the actual sword. If this would exist, it would actually be just pressed through the sword like this. So I mean, we could do that. So again, we needed to make the sword a little bit longer to compensate, and then pull that down, and then oops, spacebar. Grab just this. We'll just lasso select these guys, and we could delete those out. So now we have these little spikes here. So one way of handling this would be to grab the scale tool and just scale down on the y-axis, something like that. And now we have a better hole in our mesh. We don't have those extra polygons there. But a different, quicker way of doing this, hit the undo button a few times to bring all this stuff back, is I'll show you guys a new tool. And how this is going to work is I'm just going to go to the front view. So again, I hold spacebar, control and spacebar, and go to front. Or up here you can just go to front. Either way works. And I only want to affect these polygons, so I'm going to select these so the other ones don't get affected. And I'm going to use the slice tool. So we've never used the slice tool, we've used edge slice before. But how the slice tool works is it just literally, you draw a line and it cuts through an object. So let's do a demonstration of this. I have the slice tool active, and this I actually don't right click in the 3D viewport. I left click and I just drag out a line. And wherever that line is, I hit spacebar and it actually makes a cut right through our object. So let's undo that. So ideally we want a straight line, and it's a little bit hard to make this straight. You can eyeball it and make it almost straight. That would probably be fine. But there's this little guy right here called snapping, so I can click on him, turn snapping on. Now left click on slice, left click and drag, and now you can see that it'll even try to snap to like different vertices and stuff. But I just want to pull it straight out, and again, if I get away from other vertices, it won't try to snap to those. And you can see that my mouse is going down, 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 and then it snaps, up, and then it snaps. This whole area right here is all snapping area. So I can just let go, spacebar, and it cut the object. Now I can double click the object, and I can just lasso select this bottom half and cut it. So now when I bring it back, I actually want to turn snapping off real quick. I don't want this to snap yet. So again, that's a really, really brief introduction to snapping. We'll go over that in more detail later. But again, just a different way of handling this blade. So the blade's good, the handle's good, the hilt, we just need those gems on. But we actually need to do, I actually won't do the cuts in the blade, I'll do the cuts in the wood, and then you can apply that technique to the blade if you choose to. So real quick, I want to add the gems to this. I'm actually going to copy paste this and put it up here. So the thing that I don't want to do is, let's go ahead and copy paste this and start moving it, is I want a sphere here, but I actually don't want to just scale this down and put it in like that. What I actually want to do is I want to utilize this top portion. So what I'm going to do is switch to rotate, hold the control key, and rotate that 90 degrees. Again, if you'd rather, you can just put 90 degrees down here. And now I'm going to scale this to get the shape that I want. And I'm actually going to go in and delete half of it. So I don't need any of these polygons, they'd be intersecting anyway. And now I can just press this right up against it. I want to make it to where it's just tucked inside. You can just see that little gap in there. And now I can use the scale tool to get this the shape that I want it. Something like that. It should work out just fine. And now for these ones on the side, I'm going to do copy paste. Oops, I kind of didn't hit the arrow. I misclicked it. So I'm just going to delete that. I want it to be perfectly horizontal. So copy paste, W to move, then really carefully click on that arrow and make sure I'm just grabbing that. Now I can scale this down and get that little gem shape. The other thing is this gem looks like it's pointier on this side than it is on this side. So let's go ahead and address that. So we'll grab, let's just do this one at a time. Grab these two verts, scale them in. These two, scale them in. These two, scale them in. Now let's do a weird little lasso select and get those ones. Scale those in. And then if we, oops, undo that, hit spacebar. And then if we want, we can scale these in. And again, I just switched to edges, which is fine. So we'll do something like that. And the other thing, if you really don't like how this is going, you could do that join average technique to put those. I'm just going to scale these in a little bit more. Something like that. So we'll call that good. Now I want this gem over here. So again, instead of, let's go ahead and look at our mesh. Instead of remodeling this, we're just going to take advantage of that mirror tool that we've used before. So duplicate, left click, all zeros, apply, and we have that second gem. Really simple. So these gems aren't going to be as thick, so we'll scale them both at the same time. And then move them both at the same time until they're just intersecting. Because again, it's better for something to be clipping through a little bit than to be floating off like this. So just like that. Now I'm actually going to select all three of these. So a really quick way of doing this is I can just click one polygon on each one by holding shift. So hold shift and click, click, click. Shift is still held down and double click and that'll grab all of them. Now we're going to do the mirror operation, Z, apply, and then they all come over here. So again, really simple. So the sword model's almost done. We just want to get these little chips. So again, we have one up here, one here, one here, and one here. So actually we'll turn the mirror tool on for these two, because again, I don't want to do those twice. And then we'll do these two independently, because this one's closer to the middle, this one's closer to the bottom. So again, this would be the right side of the sword, so over here. So how we're going to do this is go to the Mesh Edit tab. We're actually going to use Edge Slice. And what I'm going to do, so let's double check, this one was towards the bottom. I'm going to click on this edge, and then instead of going to the edge, I'm just going to go to the middle of the polygon, about right here, and then click back, and then click here. And we'll position this a little bit better. So right now, I couldn't click on this and close it up, so I actually have to hit spacebar or escape, grab that tool again, click here, and then click here. So this is going to be the start of our little chip. Let's use our edge slice tool a couple more times. Let's isolate this so we just see just the sword. So edge slice again. Now I'm going to go from here to here to here. And what this is going to let me do is grab this vertex right here. And I'm just going to grab it on this little green circle. And I'm just going to pull it in. Just like that. We have a little chip. So the other thing is this polygon is now an n-gon. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 sides. So ideally we don't want that. So I'm just going to use that edge slice tool. And I'm just going to kind of clean this up. So go from this vertex to here. Hold the shift key to start over. Click. Click. Throw in here. Oops. I just kind of filled all those out. So this guy is now an n-gon as well. So let's click. Hold shift. Click. 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 So I just effectively turned these into all triangles. So we can do the same side on this side. This one was in the center. So again, edge slice, left click, edge slice again. Oops, I want to make sure that says 0 or 100. There we go. So now I made those slices. I made it a little bit too wide, so let's just use the move tool and bring that in. You could even use the move tool and make this wider. Again, I want to make sure that I'm not pulling this out, because again, that's going to affect the shape in a weird way. We want to keep it parallel to this. Edge slice again, like that. Just move that in. Now we can do that same cleanup method from here to here. Hold shift from here to here to here, something like that. Because again, what we want to avoid is really, really long, extremely skinny polygons. So again, if this was to go from here, this is going to be a really long, skinny polygon, where this is just going to be a better solution. It's a little bit wider, a little bit wider. And again, that's just one of those best practices things that we'll go over a little bit more later. So I can continue, oops, make sure that says 0 or 100. Continue cleaning this up, just like that. So again, now I can turn symmetry in the X on. And I can do the same thing. So again, from the beginning of class when we went over all those tools, we really haven't introduced anything new. I mean, we touched on snapping. We did that new, this slice tool right here. So again, just really slowly introducing stuff to you guys. And the other thing, don't be afraid to see something like the pen slice. Be curious about that and just hit that F1 key and click on it. Because a lot of these tools are really, really useful, you'll find. Again, I'm just doing some cleanup. Oops, so it looks like over here didn't actually symmetrize, which is okay. We can just manually cut through this and clean it up. Let's grab just this polygon. I actually can turn toggle verts, just to make sure that we didn't have any extra ones. Oops, this isn't cutting. Oh, I had my wireframe turned off. So if we make that little cut in there, I can adjust this. And then we can do a cut from here to here. And then this little guy, can use that scale tool and just scale these two together. Or just do the join average, either or. But again, at some point I'm going to want to do some type of merge on these guys. So I would personally just go to that vertex tool and hit the join average on those. There we go, something like that. And there's a little wood chip on both sides now. If I wanted, I could put some in the back, but I'm not going to worry about it. So from here, we're going to call the model done. Again, remember this little curly area. You can model that in if you want to. Try to keep it pretty low polygon, polygon count. But from here, we're going to call this good. So let's jump into unwrapping this. So we've unwrapped quite a bit of things on here so far. So I'll probably do this one a little bit faster. So what I'm going to do for these little gems is realistically, looking at just the gem, is it would flatten out pretty easy. So I'm actually not going to do any slices in this. Just going to have the polygon selected, left click, hover over the 3D viewport, right click, see what that looks like. Looks good to me. So I can actually do multiple of these at the same time. So let's grab all 5 that are remaining, left click, right click, all 5 are done really quick. Let's grab this little guy. So again, sphere, usually I'd recommend to just cut those in half. So you get a top half and a bottom half. Perfectly acceptable. This handle is just a cylinder, so again, we'll cut off the bottom. And we'll actually grab this side edge right here. Left click, right click, just like that. So let's hide all this. So it looks like we have the blade and that cross guard left. So with this, what I'm actually going to do is I'm just going to select these 2 polygons, and then here's another hotkey for you. Shift and up arrow is going to grow that selection. Shift up arrow again is going to grow it again, and shift up arrow again is going to grow it one more time. So realistically, we have these polygons, these little inner edge polygons on all sides, and then these front facing ones here and here. So left click, right click, and you see this is just the front of the blade. If I needed to paint this in Photoshop, or if I'm painting it in Modo, it's going to be really easy to just go in there and just know how this blade needs to be. So this portion of the blade is good. We'll hit H to hide, which flipping this over, it only leaves this portion of the blade, so left click, right click, and this is perfectly fine for an unwrap. Checker pattern on that would read just fine. So now we have this guy. And normally I would just unwrap this like a box, but now it has these little chips. So it's going to be a little bit more tricky. So what you could do potentially is just grab a single face with its chips, something like that, unwrap, and do that to all the sides. Or let's just try to unwrap this like a box. So we'll grab this edge right here, this edge right here, again being really careful with what we're grabbing. Let's do those ones will be easy right there. Oops, I actually deselected the ones I had. It's okay, we can just go back in and lasso select those. And we'll do these guys. Let's just unwrap that and see what happens. There we go. Saying this works perfect. So again, it's still kind of like a box. You have that normal T shape. Again, if this was more of a normal box, it'd be like that, how we've done boxes before. So again, that works perfectly fine. Oops, I'm hitting all kinds of hotkeys. My bad. But again, other thing you could do is just select these faces, maybe even 2 or 3 at a time. Do an unwrap, oops, right click, and you get the same thing. I'm going to do it all as one big piece like this though. So not everything on this is unwrapped. We'll go ahead and just do this default pack, leave this, and now for the sword, this will be good. It's ready to be thrown in with the other assets and textured again. I'm not going to want to texture it like this. I'm going to throw all the assets into the same scene a little bit later and texture all of them together. And we'll do that in another video.